We start with thought. It all begins and ends with our relationship to thought, for all goodness flows from a quiet mind. If we were to use the amount of attention as a barometer for what we're most interested in, we would all have to agree that our thoughts are at the top of the list. So much time is spent with our thoughts, these little projections. We're just mesmerized by them. They're like a precursor to the smartphone, the inner screen all day long, nonstop. I call it the original addiction. Nothing harder to kick than that one. And no addiction is more dangerous. Belief in those thoughts is the root cause of all suffering. And that internal suffering projects out in the world and creates madness, our inner division on view as a world of problems. Just take a look at the internet. What is it but the human mind on display? Lots of extraordinary things, no doubt, but on balance, bloated with chaos. And with what we know of our own minds, what else would we expect? Why would the internet, or the wider world for that matter, look any different than the inner workings of our own minds? For what else can inner conflict create but outer conflict? To think otherwise is delusional. Thoughts, the root cause of all suffering? A big statement, no doubt, but it doesn't take much to confirm this in ourselves. If I could instantly still your mind, would you have any problems in your life? How might they appear to you in the moment? Would they not have to arise in the form of thought first? This is not to discount the challenges we all face in modern life, but for the sake of this essay, we want to be crystal clear about the cause of our suffering. The vast majority of us believe that we are in league with thought, and rather than it creating our suffering, it's doing its best to help us find our way out. It's a lovely idea. However, I find that if I ask people what they want more than anything, if you drill down deep enough, it's peace of mind. More than anything, we all want the mind to be still. It's a relief just imagining it, free of thought whenever we want. Why don't we experience that? It sounds so simple and yet frustratingly elusive. In the winter of 1984, I was 20 years old and backpacking through Europe with my best friend. We were both exhausted, sitting alone in the back of a Viennese tram returning to our hostel after a long night, when something alarming happened. As the tram clacked along, I suddenly became aware that thoughts were appearing in my mind of their own accord. Up until that moment in my life, I believed without doubt that I created all my thoughts, and conversely could stop them at will. On this particular night, however, in the bitter cold of an Austrian winter, I sat with horror and watched my mind thinking all by itself. It was the very first time in my life where the witness was present, and I was starkly aware of thoughts arising on their own. There was a me that was somehow separate from the thoughts. Whereas this may sound like a desirable development, it was radical and terrifying at the time. I had no reference whatsoever to understand this turn of events. I believed wholeheartedly that I was in control of my thinking, and suddenly experiencing it happening on its own challenged my sense of sanity. How could this be? Something was clearly wrong. I couldn't understand how or why the thoughts were occurring, and more so, why I was helpless to stop them. I remember sitting in that tram for quite some time watching my mind produce an endless stream of unwanted thoughts over which I seemed powerless. I don't remember the exact nature of the thoughts, but I do remember very clearly that I was thinking about things I didn't want to, which made it even more frightening. I thought I was losing my mind. When I think about that common phrase and flesh it out a bit, I would say that I felt like I was losing control of my mind, or perhaps had already lost control of my mind. In essence, I thought I was going crazy. What else could explain the fact that my thoughts were now appearing on their own as opposed to waiting for me to begin and end them as I thought I had my whole life? I couldn't share this with my best friend because I was too confused and scared, so I sat quietly until we got back to the hostel. He went to bed while I stayed up and wrote a feverish letter to my girlfriend back in the States, telling her that I thought I was falling apart. The next morning, when I awoke, by some miracle, all had returned to normal. The witness that had appeared the night before was gone, and I was once again the master of my mind, or so I imagined. But the experience shook me deeply, so much so that when my friend and I made our New Year's resolutions a few weeks later, at the top of my list was learn how to meditate. Nearly a decade passed before I followed through on that resolution, however. Like the desperate promises we make to God during a health scare to change our ways and right our lives, once those crises pass, we often just continue on as before. And this was the case for me. That night in Vienna had been terrifying, but because it had only lasted a matter of hours, I soon forgot about it. The understanding that thoughts arise and fall away of their own accord is a primary and necessary insight. Without this understanding, we believe the path forward is to find a way to control our minds, to somehow corral the thinking process and make it our servant. This simply doesn't work. Or, as is often the case, we try to become positive thinkers. While that may be a lovely thought, it can lead to extreme frustration and shame. Why can't I think the way I'm supposed to? I imagine many of you reading this essay already know that thoughts appear on their own, but it never hurts to remind ourselves of this. After all, our addiction to thought is pervasive, and from what I can tell, the most challenging aspect of the spiritual path, and truly the only real obstacle to inner peace. So let's do a little experiment just to remind ourselves of what we're dealing with. I call it the light switch test. Sit quietly and notice thoughts occurring. Now, if you were in control of your thinking, you would be able to turn it on and off at will. So, for this experiment, let's go easy. Turn your thinking off for only 1 minute. That shouldn't be too hard. But guess what? It is. Go ahead and try. If you're able to do that, try 5 minutes. You will, in all likelihood, fail at this. It's not because you have a weak mind or you're doing something wrong. If we were in control of our thinking, it would be as easy as a light switch. You flick it on, it's on. You flick it off, it's off. And that's not our experience. The only conclusion we can reach is that we're not in control of our thinking. Thinking happens on its own. And once we begin meditating, this becomes abundantly clear. Not because you're weak of mind, but because you never have been in control of your thinking. Our job is to lose interest in them, not to try to control them. This can be an extremely terrifying realization for those who are still under the mistaken belief of mind control. After all, our actions follow our thoughts. If I'm not in control of my thinking, then what? At the end of each essay, I'm going to bring us back to our direct experience now. I find it extremely helpful to be constantly reminded to do so, and it can build a lovely habit of using now as our classroom. Just for a minute, let your mind open to the extraordinary amount of thoughts you've had in your life. And then try to notice that there has always been the same sense of you that has been aware of all those thoughts, regardless of age, regardless of the content, the same you that is aware of the thoughts that are arising right now. Can you sense that it's the same you that has been aware of all the thoughts you've ever had? See if you can notice that there's an ever-present background sense of you that is effortlessly aware of thoughts coming and going. It becomes crystal clear when we look closely that we can't rely on thought to tell us who we are. Thought is ephemeral, shifty, and constantly changing. It comes and goes before we even know it most of the time. And yet our sense of ourselves is something constant, present, and whole. There must be something other than thought, which, on its own, is far too fleeting to have any sense of foundation to it. There's something deeper. There's something steady and constant, and even if you're not directly aware of this deeper reservoir of being, it manifests in your life as a sort of baseline steadiness. You know it by default, just by your sanity. So the question arises, who would I be without thought? knowing that I cannot rely on thought to tell me who I am. Who am I without it? Look into your own experience now as you read this passage. There's something that notices thought, something effortlessly aware that notices everything come and go. What is this quiet presence that is the background of your experience? What is it in your experience right now that doesn't require any effort from you to exist? Who are you right now without relying on thought to describe yourself? Give up your addiction to thought just now and see what happens.